So, I'm not 100% sure what we're doing for the rest of this term yet, but tonight we're actually going to come back to what we missed at the end of last term, which is that, you remember there was a night where Crystal got unwell quite suddenly, and we were going to do the subject of Christ Incarnate. It was appropriate because it was coming up to Christmas, and it's still appropriate because, golly, it's good news even now. And now here's my opening question. I've written down these three things. Each of them kind of consolidated versions of things that significant people in church history have said. Each of them trying to express what it means, what the incarnation means. And I don't want you to discuss them amongst yourselves. I want you to think to yourself and decide which of these do I think is the right way of expressing this. Do I think any of these is the right way of expressing this? Okay, so number one, if you struggle with my handwriting, Jesus had a human body, but with the mind and spirit of God. Number two, Jesus was two persons, one God and one man in the one body. Or number three, Jesus is God and man combined to make a new third thing. Are you ready to cast your vote for which one you think is right? Just yes or no? Or do you need a second to think them through? Take a second. Ready or?
I'm ready.
Okay, all right. Anyone want to put their hand up? Now, you're not allowed to change your vote based on how you see other people vote, by the way. I could make you shut your eyes, but that seems unkind. Who would cast themselves for number one? Number two? Number three? And who would say none of the above? Well, I'm afraid only France gets it this time. You can't be, you got to pick. So,
Number three was all right until it says to make a new third thing.
yeah, so here's, it was a bit of a trap, I'll admit. We're talking about the incarnation, and we take a lot of kind of pre-reading for granted when we come to talking about this. But in the early church history, there was quite a bit of time where they spent quite a while trying to figure out exactly what this meant. And now I'm going to get their names a little bit wrong, but in 361, I can tell you the name of the thing. Apollinario, but whatever, either way. He came up with basically this idea, and some people went along and thought, oh yeah, that kind of sounds right. So Jesus had a human body, but really he was in essence God, not human. Yeah, or Apollinarianism, as it came to be called. What's the problem with Apollinarianism? What's the issue? What do we lose? Humanity. He's not really human. He's just God pretending to be human, right? Why is that a problem? Yeah, there's lots of problems. We'll dig into them a bit more as we go. But yeah, there's some really big problems. I only wrote down the year for one of them. Oh, that's disappointing. Later on, you have a guy named Nestorius. Yeah, we'll write his name.
Around about 430-ish.
No, roughly 430 AD. Jesus was two persons, one God and one man in one body. So, what's the problem? Well, yeah, it's easy in retrospect just to give it a name, isn't it? But he isn't we, is he? Like Jesus doesn't speak in terms of himself being two people. He's one person. He's not a split personality of there's the God part and there's the man part of him. He's one person. And then finally, Eutychius? that guy. Eutychianism, anyway. I've just got a year. Got a stab.
Not a fan, no, sorry.
He came up with this. He goes, well, I think I've got it. Jesus is a combination of God and man. You know, kind of you get a bit of God, you get a bit of man, mix them together, and out comes Jesus.
And make a new third thing.
Yeah, what's the problem there?
He's neither God nor man.
Yeah, you lose them both. You know, in this case, you lose the manness of him. In this case, he's not either thing. There's two people.
Yeah, saying there were two sons. Jesus was two sons. Son of God and Son of Man.
And in this one, he's not man or God. And if he's not God, then he can't bring us into the presence of God. And if he's not man, he can't be our representative.
But I think that's how depends how you read that. You know, Jesus is we would say he's fully God and fully man.
Uh-huh.
And that is something different. It's not like us.
Yeah, but...
It's like us.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. But this isn't saying fully God and fully man. Like a new third thing, which is a mix of the two. Anyway, this is what I meant by it.
Eutychus is pretty soon after this story, I think.
Yeah, right.
And within 10 years at least.
Just after that, sure. Now, but let's acknowledge, it's genuinely a bit difficult, isn't it? Like there's an extent to which you look back and you go, it's kind of understandable that they struggled with this stuff. Even we just voted on it, and some of us went in different directions, and we weren't sure, and it's a bit unclear. It's genuinely difficult. But more than that, it's genuinely mysterious and marvelous. And that's kind of primarily what I want us to do tonight, is marvel at this amazing thing. Is everyone done with the early Christological heresies? Marvel at the truth of the Incarnation. We're going to see how it applies a bit to us at the end, maybe as we go as well. But consider this. If I give us a nice line down the middle of the board, and I'll bring my thing over so I stop walking back and forth. Is Luke 2 in that Bible?
I think it is.
Not in the others, so it must be them.
Yes, indeed. So read us out Luke 2:11 in the plain English translation.
They've combined verses 11 and 12 together. Today a young woman had a baby boy over there in Bethlehem, in the place where David grew up. Go there and you'll find him. He's wrapped up in cloth, lying in an animal's feed box. Then you'll know that this message is true. He's the one that's going to save you people. He's the Christ, the man that God promised to send you to be your leader.
Yeah, right. Well, that's an interesting translation. The ESV, a little bit more literally translates it, and a bit more familiarly for us, says, unto you is born this day in the city of David now we talked about this heaps in December, didn't we? A Saviour who is Christ the Lord, right? And Lord is the same word that when they translate the Old Testament into Greek, they use to express the personal name of God in the Old Testament. It's quite a claim that is being made there of who Jesus is even then. And then consider things like, now I haven't even written down verse references, but maybe me writing you out a whole bunch of verses is the wrong way to go about this. Where are the bits in the New Testament that we see the godness of Jesus come through? John 1, so what do you mean? Yeah, the Word was God. Yeah, I wrote that down. Before Abraham was. That's one that I didn't write the reference for. I am. You know, we understand the significance. The apparently poor grammar in that sentence is there intentionally, because he's making not just a claim to preceding Abraham, but to the I amness of God. You know, that God in the Old Testament specifically reveals himself to his people as the great I am. That I am who I am is what he tells Moses to tell the leaders of Israel. So he's, you know, think about Revelation, the Alpha and the Omega. That's a title that in the Revelation gets applied to God specifically and to Jesus specifically. Sorry?
The beginning and the end.
Yeah. So very much is pointing to him and saying he is the same person as God. He's God. He's worthy of all praise and honor. Anyone got any other passages? There's so many, aren't there? Like, but when you get poked in the moment, it's like being in a job interview. I hate job interviews.
Receive Thomas's words of my Lord.
Yeah. My Lord, that's terrible handwriting. And my God, from Thomas. And Jesus doesn't say, no. You know, you get angels in Revelation who, when John falls down and worships them, they say, no, don't do that. I'm a man like, I'm a created thing like you. Just a servant of God like you. And Jesus has Thomas fall down in front of him, say, my Lord and my God. And you can't be a lot more explicit than that. And Jesus doesn't go, no, don't worship me. He just, yes, that's appropriate. Or Philippians 2, therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. So, you know, there's an exaltedness to Jesus. There is a highness to Jesus. There is a godness to Jesus. So who is Jesus? He is worthy of all praise. Sorry. Alpha and Omega, the great and eternal God. But, you know, if we can title this side Godness, I don't know if that should have a double N or not, but where do we see the manness of Jesus in the Bible? Way to cut to the end, Dad. Anything else? I mean, you know, you've given us a neat inclusio, although not really. It's you've only taken us to halfway in some ways. Yeah. Tiredness, hungriness. Weariness, sorrow, hunger. Yeah, and the answer.
But ask that of God, but Jesus in the garden.
Yeah. But that, you know, I think what France is saying is it could even express something of his godness. But yeah, still, you know, a very human suite of emotions and instances. Like I think about Luke 2, 52. So Jesus increased in wisdom. Right? You know, you wouldn't really look at God and say that in his godness he's increasing in wisdom. Increased in wisdom and in stature and in favour with God and man. Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, people think of when is it in Nazareth, and you know, people were saying, you know, well, hang on, isn't this the son of Joseph and the brother of this and the other and so on, you know, so what's so unusual about him?
Yeah. Well, precisely. And
What do you mean in there just a minute ago when you said increasing in wisdom?
yeah.
I thought he would have been wisdom.
Yeah. So this is an interesting question, isn't it? Because it's not my wording. That's Luke 2:52. Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favour with God and man. It's one of the very, very few brief insights that we get into the kind of intervening years of the life of Jesus, between kind of a few years old when the wise men come and visit, and you know, you get that little moment in the temple when he's 12, and not a lot else. But Luke 2:52 says he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favour with God. And so, does that mean that he was unwise beforehand? No. It means that he matured as a person. He, in a sense at least, learned things as a child. This is a thing that theologians grapple with and come up a bit short sometimes because, they'll often say things like he had access to the full knowledge of God if he chose to think of it. Or something like, because it's like, well, if he knew everything, then why would he have to increase? But it's hard. You can't quite fully fathom the depth of this.
It's been very hard for the people at that time who were in the temple when he came in as a 12-year-old
Yeah.
and said what he said. And we'd think that, if a 12-year-old came in and did that, we'd think that'd probably be a bit rude.
Yeah, well, maybe, but...
He doesn't actually say that he was, he's asking questions of,
Yeah.
exact wording. He's asking, he's in conversation with these guys. But not,
Here I am without my Bible.
I don't think it actually says that he took a
Authority.
just by the questions and the conversation they were having, there was enough for them to see that he was a very lad.
What is it, Luke?
Yeah, see that saying was pretty close to,
Just before the
yeah.
Verse 47 is pretty, he wasn't just asking questions.
Well, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And so, he's engaging in conversation, but primarily he's listening and asking questions.
He's not sitting down there as though I'm the teacher and I'm going to tell you. Yeah.
But he's answering their questions.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's so many places, again, that you can look for this, right? Like the madness of Jesus is not ambiguous in the Bible. I think of John 4:6, wearied from his journey when he came to the well. It doesn't say he put on as though he was weary from his journey. It says wearied from his journey as he was. When they sail out into the storm in Luke chapter 8, what does Jesus do? He falls asleep in the back of the boat. We got to imagine, it's not just a theatrical act of Jesus that he falls asleep in the back of the boat. He was tired. It's an interesting interplay. I find John 19, 28, is it? I read it and then I walked away, and then John 19:28 to be such a fascinating glimpse into kind of the sovereign hand of God in all things, working right there alongside the humanity of Jesus. John 19:28, so Jesus is on the cross. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scriptures, I thirst. Now, was he actually thirsty? Yeah. Yeah, he was actually thirsty. He was nailed on a cross. They hadn't given him anything. He'd been scourged. He had lost enormous amounts of body fluid. Of course he would have been thirsty. And the point that John's making isn't that, he wasn't actually thirsty. He was just saying he was thirsty to fulfill the scriptures. The point was that the life of Jesus in its real and true actual form fulfilled the scriptures as God had put them forward. And of course, the most critical example being that he died. But he wept in John 11. He marveled at the faith of the centurion.
The unfaith of his disciples.
Yeah.
How long do I have to be with you?
He was troubled. Now is my soul troubled. He was tempted. He was, what does Hebrews 2 says? He had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. What's more, Hebrews 4, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect, as I said, has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. He can deal gently, this is Hebrews 5, verse 2, he can deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. So who's Jesus? Well, in the left column, mighty, worthy of all praise, God most high, honor and glory and power all belong to him. In the right column, weak and frail and tempted, yet still without sin. I always think of, and this was going to be a much more relevant anecdotal thought to throw in December now that I think about it. But the song Silent Night? It's a beautiful song with ridiculous lines. Radiant beams from thy holy face. The absurdity of it all. There's no biblical reason. The more realistic possibility is realistic screams from thy holy face, because he was an actual baby, right? Not to say that he wasn't God as well. How does that work in a baby? Get your head around it. No, you probably won't. It's all right, neither do I. So,
Wouldn't there have been some sort of a glow or...
do you think he glowed any of the rest of his life?
Well, I sort of think, that the shepherds saw the stars and they saw beams coming down, or whoever did, perhaps it was the three wise men, I can't remember. But, perhaps I'm just taking it from pictures I've seen.
Well, yeah,
There would have been something.
It's very understandable because almost every Christmas card depicts it as shiny.
Yeah.
But the Bible doesn't. If anything, the Bible represents the birth of Jesus as dark. Dark. Because it happens in a stable amongst hay at night, the animals, or a stable or the room of the house where they keep the animals. You could debate that. Yeah. It says at night in Luke, yeah. And the star certainly leads the wise men to Bethlehem, but there's nothing that says the star lit up the room where Jesus was sitting. That's the light of a star outside. There's nothing that says, and it doesn't say that he glowed. And you just got to apply that thinking to, 20 years later. Do we expect that he was glowing at that point? No. Well, then it's probably just a thing we've added because we thought it would be nice, Christmas cards, this is a sidetrack. Christmas cards give us all sorts of unrealistic expectations of exactly what it was like. Both in the overstatement and the understatement category. So on the overstatement category, you get glowing Jesus. And Mary has travelled to Bethlehem from Nazareth, maybe on foot. No mention of a donkey. And she is in this resplendent blue robe, sitting with a perfect posture and whatnot. Look at James, he's young. Look at his posture. They're really what?
Far back.
Yeah. Well, if you know how to fix that, feel free. But then on the understatement category, you get the cards that represent the angels in the fields over the shepherds. And Luke 2 says the glory of the Lord shone around them. And the way they choose to express that is by it being a bit sparkly. And I think of that, and I'm like, that phrase, the glory of the Lord, only gets used elsewhere in the Bible in situations where people are so terrified by the presence of this glory that they either do die or they feel they're going to die. It's the same glory that came and filled the temple when Solomon, dedicated the temple. And it's the same glory that came out of the tabernacle. We're going to get to this in Numbers when we get there. The glory of the Lord comes out of the tabernacle and consumes in judgment people who are worshipping falsely. When these guys come up and say, "Hey, look, shouldn't we all be priests? Why do you guys get to be the priests? God tells us we should all be priests, right?" And Moses says, "All right, everyone grab your censer full of incense and God will decide," and God decides. And the glory of the Lord decides. But anyway, I've got a special beef with Christmas cards, as it turns out. But let's move on. So, anyway, you remember the three positions, right, that we had up on the board before, the three early Christological heresies? Well, eventually the church gets together, a whole bunch of leaders from a whole bunch of churches from all around the Christian world at the time get together, and they have a thing that we now call the Council of Chalcedon. In 451, I wrote down another date, there you go. And this is kind of a condensed version of what they said, they came up with language that probably sounds a bit familiar to us now. Jesus exists in two natures, not two persons. Does that sound like something you might have heard before? He exists in two natures. So he has a God nature and a man nature, but not two people. He is one person with two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. It is one of those statements where the church is sitting down and going, look, what we need to recognize here is, to state this, we need to state something that we can't quite get our heads around. Don't you just want to hear something like Jesus exists in two natures but not two persons, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation, and go, well, how? And the answer is, well, God can do that. Yeah. Romans 8:3. Romans 8:3 says, "For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do. By sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh." Now, you could read Romans 8:3 and think it was just that he came looking like a person. But it's not that. It's not just the eternal Son, God the Son, taking on a body or a human person, not basically just God masquerading as a man. Body and soul, he became a man, whilst not ceasing to be fully God as well. It's like, I don't know what it's like actually, there's no good metaphor for this. It feels like the sort of thing, when they make an atomic bomb and you get two non-critical masses of something and put them together and they become a critical mass, and you just know that when you put it together it's just going to blow up everywhere. It feels like it should be that sort of a thing. It feels like these two things can't sit together. It's like trying to hold the two ends of a magnet together. It's not a thing you should do, because they just push each other. And yet God can do that. And in Jesus, the uniqueness of Jesus is that he is this. 1 Timothy 3:16 says, "Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He, Jesus, was manifested in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory." 1 John says, "By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God." You see how big a problem, how huge an issue this is. Even in the early church, even when the Bible was still being written, They're having to deal with the problem of people coming, teachers coming and saying, well, yeah, he came, but he didn't come in the flesh. It didn't really happen in that fully God and fully man way. We can't really abide by that. What do you think of when you hear the word Antichrist?
Against everything he stands for.
Yeah. Specifically, when the Bible uses the word Antichrist, it happens, John uses the word Antichrist in his letters. It doesn't come up in the Revelation, funnily enough, as a word. But John identifies Antichrist most specifically, not with a specific end times figure, but with anyone who espouses a specific belief that Jesus did not come in the flesh. 2 John 7 says, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist." Little aside note, it's so easy for us to think of all of the actions that people do as the most important thing. Like that Antichrist question. Pop culture Antichrist is someone who's a politician who does lots of conniving evil things and gathers the nations against God and things like that. I'm not saying that that's necessarily all wrong, but the thing is that when the Bible uses the word Antichrist, what it's most concerned with is the truth about Jesus being recognized or denied. Who is Jesus is the big question. It makes sense, Antichrist is someone who is anti the Christ. It's not, in the Bible's conception of it, it's not someone who is the opposite to the Christ. It's not anti-Christ in the same... I can't think of a good metaphor. My brain's just not working tonight. It's anti-Christ as in someone who is opposed to... Yeah, it's not like matter and antimatter, whereas there's this thing and then it's the opposite of that thing. It's... Sorry? Yeah, exactly, right? What's his name? I don't know, but he knows what. Yeah, we're cool. For the video, it was probably not worth saying. Sorry, James. It's a good metaphor though. It's actually more Antichrist is those who are anti-Christ, those who say that Christ isn't who Christ was, that he was not someone who came in the flesh, specifically who deny the incarnation, that he came in the flesh as both God and man. In this case, they were denying that he came as a man. So.
It's interesting that when you talk about end times, that word Antichrist comes up all the time, and yet, as you said, it's not written in Revelation.
No, it's not. And there are places where it says things like, "Ah!" It doesn't say that. Antichrist must come into the world. And you could read that and go, maybe there's an expectation of a specific figure. And many antichrists have already come, and people back and forth on that. And, I'm not trying to weigh in on that here. But,
The guy in, the man of perdition, the man of sin, or something.
man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians, one of the Thessalonians. Yeah. Yeah. What does he mean by the man of lawlessness must come? That's a tricky question. We'll do a session on that in 10 years' time when I've figured it out. No, but I hope you will have forgotten that I said this. Why is the incarnation necessary? Because God needed a perfect sacrifice for sin. I prefer that wording. Yeah. So here's a twin pair of realities. Number one, the incarnation was because of human sin. The Bible gives us that in abundant clarity, doesn't it? So Luke 19:10, let me prove it to you if you've got doubts. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Galatians 4:4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law. I think I meant to have the next verse there and I didn't. Anyway. Or 1 John 3:8. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. Which works? What works has the devil been doing since the beginning? He's been sinning. So, why? That was 1 John 3 verse 8. So, why did the incarnation have to happen? Why was it necessary? Because of human sin. But that's really not the whole story, is it? Which is, I suspect, why France gave such a dubious look when I said it the first time. So we go on and we read more Bible and we find out the incarnation was because of human sin, and yet that kind of makes it sound like it was a bit like it was responsive, right? Like reactive, that God had a good and wonderful plan, but he messed it all up, so he had to come in and fix it up and sort out the problem, and it didn't work out the way he intended. But the incarnation was not incidental or accidental. It was because of God's sovereign plan. It is so apparent throughout the scriptures, right from the very, very beginning of the scriptures. This is the thing, I hope you get sick of it going deeper, and maybe church in general, that we talk a lot about how the Old Testament, just all of the Old Testament, holds its breath in anticipation of Jesus. If you don't read it anticipating Jesus, Jesus would say that you're not reading it right, because he said the law and the prophets are fulfilled in him. You know, think about, for instance, the offspring theme in the Old Testament. So you get all of these promises of an offspring, starting with Genesis 3:15. So Genesis 3:15, I will put. So what's happening in Genesis 3? We're probably familiar. The fall is happening in Genesis 3:15. They've eaten the fruit. God has come into walking in the garden, called them out. They've all blamed each other. God has cursed the snake, and in the final words of his curse of the snake, he says, "I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Theologians love to call this the proto-evangelion or proto-evangelion, or it depends how far from Greek you're taking it, but the first gospel is what that means. It's the first declaration of the hope of the offspring who's going to come and defeat Satan. And then you get to Abraham, right, or Abram, and Galatians 3 helps us understand this. It says, "Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring," and it does not say, "and to offsprings," referring to many, but referring to one, "and to your offspring, who is Christ." This is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterwards, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to make the promise void. For if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise. But God gave it to Abraham by a promise. Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions, until the offspring should come, to whom the promise had been made. And it was put in place through angels by an intermediary. Now, he goes on, but notice Paul's argument here, right? That was a big chunk of scripture to read out and then just move on from. The promise made to Abraham way before, before David, before Moses, before Israel, either the man or the nation comes about, the promise was intended by God for Jesus, according to Paul. He was the promise is given in anticipation of Jesus. It was added because of transgressions until the offspring should come to whom the promise has been made. Jesus. And the promise is, Genesis 12:7 says, Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, To your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And Paul's saying that is always a thing. The promises to Abraham were always a thing that looked forward to the coming of the one true offspring, Jesus. The law, the old covenant, was not a permanent solution, but a placeholder waiting for the coming of Jesus. I've given up on writing references for these things, apparently. But then the promise of the offspring next comes to David. Right? These are three moments of the Old Testament worthy of your memorization, by the way, of where are really big moments in the Old Testament. Three of them are the promise to Adam and Eve in Genesis 3:15, the promise to Abraham, promises to Abraham, but in Genesis 12 particularly, and then you get to 2 Samuel 7, and there's the promise to David. David has said, I'm going to build a temple for you, God. Nathan, the prophet, makes the unfortunate mistake of saying, yeah, that sounds good. And then, this is me giving the John translation, which is not a translation at all, by the way, the paraphrase. Nathan, the prophet, says, yeah, do what's in your heart. And then he goes home and God speaks to Nathan and says, no, your son will build a temple for me. Now, there's a whole nother section of the promise looking forward to Jesus in a sense. But then God says to him, when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you. There's that word again. Who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So once again, this emphasizes, remember we talked about that passage when we looked at the kingship of Christ, right? If you can remember back to last year, which is a while ago. God's sovereign, unbreakable plan. Even the fact that Jesus came to atone for sins, in one sense, because of sins, doesn't negate the fact that he came in accordance with God's eternal, unchanging plans. It's very much like that thing that I kind of fixated in on before with the I thirst thing on the cross. That was he thirsty, or was it in accordance with what was written in the scriptures? And the answer is yes, it was those things. God had planned it from the beginning. Only God can have things happen perfectly in accordance with his plan that are also perfectly in accordance with what's happening. Because he's God, the creator of all things. The incarnation, why is the incarnation necessary? Let's add a number 3. And I'm just going to write one word for this one. Oh, that was a tiny I. It's like an iota. The incarnation is necessary to make Jesus a suitable mediator. We needed one who was under the law but without sin. If he was just God, he's not under the law. God is the one who speaks the law. God is the one who makes the law for his creation. And yet Jesus comes and he is God, but he's man. And so he is one who is under the law, but without sin. And it's just what makes his godness important as well. Like, if he hadn't been God, if he'd just been some regular guy, he would have sinned like all the rest of us, right? Galatians 4:4-5 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." Hebrews 4. I'm reading a lot of passages tonight. I hope that's okay. They're the best words. Way better than my ones. Hebrews 4:14-16 says, "Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." Being a man under the law, being God, not polluted by sin. Psalm 51:5 says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." That's true for all of us. We don't learn to sin. We are sinners. From the heart, from the start. We learn new ways to express our sin, sure. But maybe no one has to teach us, is another way to say it. No kid ever needed to be taught how to lie. Yeah. And neither the adults, right? One could debate that in the vast majority of cases, we don't stop knowing how to lie, we just get better at it.
Yeah, I think, sorry, this is probably not really very important, but you think of a very little kid playing hide and seek.
Yeah.
When he first starts playing hide and seek, he'll hide behind the chair and say, "I'm behind the chair." But then
I'm hiding.
Yeah. Then after a while he learns that he shouldn't say, "I'm behind the chair."
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the exercise. He learns to deceive.
Yeah.
They're not very good at it at the start.
Yeah. And that's true for all of us, but not for Jesus. Praise God, not for Jesus, because although he is fully a man and therefore under the law, he is also fully God and not under sin, and therefore able to be the mediator for us, able to stand between God and man. We're not terribly far from the end here. Let me say a few more things. Have we got a few more things in us? Yeah. Each person of the Trinity was active in the incarnation. You ever notice that in the Bible? It's a special moment of the triune activity of God. The synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke is what I mean by that. They mention the Spirit's involvement. Matthew 1:20 says, so the angel of the Lord appears to Joseph and says, "Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit." Luke 1, the angel says to Mary, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you and the power of the Most High will overshadow you." John and Paul really emphasize the Father's sending in the incarnation. You know, you think of John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John is almost constantly saying, or Jesus is almost constantly saying in John, how God the Father sent Jesus into the world. I love this fact. I wrote a big paper on this fact at one point in college. Like, John's whole purpose in writing his gospel, you could sum it up as faith and life. Do you remember when we did John's gospel? We did the slide for it, and it had John, life through faith in Jesus written underneath it, something like that. I wrote it, I should remember. And that's because, you know, when John tells us these things are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. So his whole reason to write is so that they'll believe in Jesus and have life through faith in Jesus. And yet, John talks about the sending of Jesus more than he talks about the life that's in Jesus. Less than he talks about faith in Jesus. It sits between those two. Just saying. It's interesting. Romans 8:3 says, God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh and for sin. He condemned sin in the flesh. Galatians 4:4, which I think we've mentioned already a couple of times. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law. You know, so the Spirit was fully involved in the incarnation. The Father is fully involved in the incarnation. Obviously, the Son is fully involved in the incarnation. That should be the easy one. I probably don't need to read out verses, but you know, I read out John 1:14 before. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. You know, that one covers them both, doesn't it? Full of grace and truth. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is 2 Corinthians 8. Though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. What's that describing? It's describing the incarnation. That the God of all heaven came down, left the riches of heaven to become a man. For you, for me. Philippians 2, verse 6 and 7. Though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. How should we respond to the incarnation? What do you think? What should be... What should the incarnation, the truth of the incarnation, bring about in us? Speak audibly, Franz. Go on, say it loud.
Lost in wonder, love and praise.
What hymn is that?
What is it?
Not a Watts? No, never mind. No, never mind. Watts, right? Like Isaac Watts? Am I getting the name right? Yeah. You know, yeah, we could summarize that in one word, right? Worship. Yeah, like, and that's right. Like, so that's the Old English origins of the word worship. It's not really the Greek and Hebrew one, but it's a very worthwhile way of understanding worship, is the thing that you attribute all of the worth to. What do you think of as most worthy, most valuable, best? What's your treasure? That's the thing you worship. That's a biblical concept, isn't it? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The incarnation should bring about our worship. That he should lower himself for me, that emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. You know, and it goes on to say, being born in human likeness, he humbled himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. thankfulness. He was so lowered so that he could be a suitable mediator. So that on the cross he could bear the sins of you and me. And even now he continues in the role of mediator. He stands between God and man. He speaks for us. He applies the finished work of the cross in every single moment for you, for me, in our sin. Wow.
Worship also implies service, obedience.
Yeah. Yeah, he deserves our obedience, doesn't he? Like not like there are societies where, you say the nobility deserve your obedience. They're just inherently like that. He's not like that. Even though he is like that. God does inherently deserve your obedience. He is your creator. No noble person in any aristocracy ever could have actually made that claim. And yet God can, and yet he's not just deserving of your obedience through his right as creator, but adoring obedience. Because he came down, he gave up his life for you, for me. Humility should be a response to this. We should recognize that for having talked about this for over an hour now, we can't get our head around it fully. It's not something you're fully going to grasp. If we started at 7:30, I'm not sure. But there's probably loads of ways you can apply the truth of the incarnation, but I'm going to finish it with one question that we should ask in response to the incarnation. What do I struggle with?
In relation to what the word says, or
No. In your life, what temptations do you struggle with? What hard things do you face? Do you suffer? Jesus has faced that. Tempted in every way as we are, it says. Because he is fully man, he has faced the struggles that we have. I've talked to people about this a few times before, and this isn't my analogy. I heard John Piper say a thing once that has always stuck with me. It's the worst metaphor I ever heard, and yet also the best, because somehow it never ever leaves my brain. He was talking about how temptation affects us. And who experiences temptation the most? Who knows temptation's power the most? And he said, it's like a person imagine a person standing with a rope tied around their waist and a big ravine in front of them, like a big cliff. And the temptation is a weight on the other end of the rope. One person feels the slight pull of the temptation and jumps. Another person feels it pull, and it pulls, and it pulls, and they resist a bit, but eventually they slip in. Hang on. Give it a sec. Give it, another person holds, and he looks up and he sees Christ, his Saviour, on the other side of the ravine, and so he holds, and he clings onto the tree, and he holds, and it cuts into his skin, but he holds, and eventually the rope breaks. Which one of them knows the power of temptation the most? The last one, right? Jesus knows temptation more than you and I. Never hardened by sin either. Never having jumped into the ravine 100 times in a row and been hardened by the power of sin. Always sensitive to it. Always sensitive to temptation, and yet without sin. And not just that, like struggled, suffered as we do. He is This is just a thing to remember when you pray to him. And the rest of the time as well, I guess. It's so easy to fall into the basic background mindset of I'm praying to this distant high deity who's way above me, and I'm grateful for his intervention, but he's God, and he might not really get it. We wouldn't say it like that, but it's easy to feel a bit that way. But we're praying to one who more than us, not less than us, knows the struggles. Suffered more than you and I ever have. Tempted with all of the power that Satan could throw at him. We think about the fact that Satan is finite, right? Like Satan, a bit hard to get your head around exactly how Satan works, but he's not God. And so he's got finite resources and he chooses how to use them. And how much of it do you think he poured out to try and get at the Son of God when he came? Yeah, a bit. And
Lewis used
go on.
a simpler analogy, but same thing. Which said it's like walking into a really, really strong wind. The sort we used to get down in Bundarenas where you get thrown
Yeah.
against the wind and you can hardly take a step forward. And he said that you've got two choices in that situation. You can just keep going against the wind, or you can lie down and let the wind go straight over the top of you.
Yeah.
But if you do that, you won't get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. He's experienced. Yeah. I get it.
And what we do is lie down.
He walked all the way to the southern point of South America. So because he's fully man, he knows. He is not distant from any of your suffering and any of your struggles. Because he is God and man, he doesn't just understand. He can and indeed has done something about it.